After 3 years of marriage, I finally got pregnant. Excitedly told him, but he said indifferently, "Don't joke, I never touched you." It was true. That night he was drunk, calling out for Jane. Later, I placed the paternity test, abortion surgery receipt, and signed divorce agreement on his desk. Around 10 o'clock at night, Jack came back home. The door opened, bringing in a cold breeze. I happily approached him holding the pregnancy test stick, but he pulled out a document from his bag. "Mary, let's get a divorce. You can have the villa we live in now. I will give you an additional 1 million in cash. Any other requests, feel free to ask." As he spoke, like a rolling thunder in my ears, I struggled to remain calm and said, "Everything was fine until now." "Jane, she's back," he said. In that moment, the pregnancy test stick in my hand suddenly felt as cold as ice. But she couldn't have children. My parents wouldn't agree. 3 years ago, because of this, they forced us apart and Jane left for a foreign country, while I married him. Jack's voice was low. "I don't want to miss the second chance. Only her, not just settling." Nails deeply embedded in my palms, my throat felt choked up. He looked at me with a faint scent of perfume piercing my nostrils. "Did you have something to tell me earlier?" I looked up at him. 3 years of marriage. Seeing that face day after day still made my heart flutter. If we have a baby, would you still divorce me?" Jack frowned. "Mary, there are no ifs in this world. When we agreed to the marriage, we promised not to fall in love, not to get entangled. Have you forgotten?" His gaze was firm, and in them, I saw my chaotic self. That one pregnancy test stick became a hook covered in barbs, hooking into me and drawing blood, but unable to harm him in the slightest. After a long stare, I smiled lightly. "I haven't forgotten." He breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good. When it comes to your parents, they'll still need you to help me act the part." He tapped on the document on the table. "Take a good look at the agreement." Just as he was about to leave, I couldn't help but say, "Jack, do you ever?" Before I could finish, his phone rang. He answered it softly. "Jane," gave me a look as if to say, "We'll talk later," then went into the study and closed the door. I finished what I wanted to say quietly. "Did you ever, even for a moment, love me?" The empty corridor couldn't give me an answer. That night, I had a dream on the big bed in the master bedroom. Jane pushed Jack and told him to go for a checkup. Then she turned to Mary to chat. Jack immediately became nervous and asked if Jane wasn't feeling well, if her stomach was acting up again, or if she had missed taking her medicine. The year they got married, Jack worked like crazy to ease Jane's pain from leaving, leading to irregular eating and a stomach bleeding episode, resulting in a stomach condition. Before Jack could answer, Jane explained they were there for a routine premarital checkup. Jack seemed to want to say something about the checkup, but in the end just said he would go first. As soon as he left, Jane's smile disappeared, and she mentioned returning something stolen to Mary. Mary replied calmly, reminding Jane that she was the one who gave up on him first. Jane smirked, saying she easily won him back, despite their $1 million villa and the 3 years of Mary's investment. Mary advised her to know when to let go, to avoid losing everything in the end. Outside, the sky was vast and clear. The sunlight felt cool on Mary's face, as she straightforwardly asked Jane if Jack would still love her if he found out she had a child with another man. Jane's pupils darted as she acknowledged that they were both deceitful, and Mary warned her to not provoke her, as she could easily reveal everything. That evening, when Jack returned, Mary had already set up the dinner. Apologetically, Jack explained that he had already eaten out with Jane and forgot to inform Mary. Mary pretended not to mind and continued eating silently, pushing down her questions, frustrations, and pleas deep within. Jack poured her some water and suggested they visit his parents the next day to discuss the divorce. Mary asked about reasons to mention to his parents, but Jack had already thought of an excuse to not bring up Jane to prevent parental disapproval. Mary mumbled a response with an egg stuck in her throat, and asked if the agreement had been signed. Mary couldn't stay calm anymore. She stared at Jack intensely. It had been 3 years of marriage, yet he couldn't spare the time for her to consult a lawyer about the agreement. Mary brought up a time when Jack mourned the loss of their dog so deeply, but failed to show the same emotions for her. Jack explained it was his work habits and assured Mary not to overthink it. Mary suddenly felt nauseous and rushed to the bathroom to vomit. Concerned, Jack offered to take her to the hospital, but as he made a move, his phone rang. It was Jane. Apologizing to Mary, Jack explained that he had to go help Jane with a burst pipe at her house. Despite Mary feeling unwell, she declined his offer and stayed at home alone that night. The next morning, Jack came back to take Mary to his parents' house. Mary thought it would be a small family gathering, but to her surprise, a large group of relatives had gathered. As Jack's relatives surrounded her, his aunt's twin grandsons clung to her legs. Jack seemed uneasy with so many guests and questioned his mother, who justified the gathering with the seafood she bought. Jack expressed his urgency to tell his family about the divorce and asked Mary to make room for Jane in the conversation. During the meal, Jack's mother handed Mary some seafood and advised her not to overeat. When encouraged by his mother to eat more to have a child soon, Jack stood up and dropped a piece of fish he was holding onto his plate. At that moment, his young nephew found a pregnancy ultrasound report and asked about it. After a brief excitement, it turned out to be Mary's report. Jack stood up, grabbed the report, and revealed that the child wasn't his as he suffered from a fertility issue. His family was shocked until he showed them his medical report, and the celebration turned into a solemn affair. On the way back, neither Mary nor Jack spoke in the car stuck in traffic. Mary sarcastically commented on Jack's sacrifice of his own future for an easier marriage with Jane. Jack, holding onto the steering wheel tightly, did not respond at all. Mary pointed out how Jack never informed her, supposedly his lawful wife, about Jane's pregnancy. His cold gaze was scrutinizing. "You never told me who the father of the child in your belly is." "It's yours," I replied. He laughed. "Mary, don't joke with me. I've never touched you." It's true. That night, slightly drunk, he came back to a moonlit living room. I made hangover soup for him, and after he finished it holding my hand, he hugged me, the alcohol intoxicating both of us. In a soft tone, he said, "Mary, I've figured it out. Growing old together wouldn't be a bad idea." "Growing old together," he said, "a promise only lovers make." I believed him. I kissed him, and he kissed me back. The moonlight in the room witnessed our intimacy, but also heard him quietly call out Jane in the moment of climax. It was later that I found out he was rarely drunk that night, because he had learned Jane had already found a new love while abroad. He never mentioned it afterward. I thought he needed time to accept it. Little did I know, he had forgotten our entanglement, forgotten that he once saw me as a substitute for Jane. My heart was shattered like glass shards, painful and hurt. I couldn't wait to tell him that night wasn't just a dream. But he beat me to it. "Mary, I indeed have a low sperm count. That report wasn't faked." My mind buzzed. How could this be possible? If he had a low sperm count, then how did I get pregnant? After a long traffic jam, things finally became clear. Jack looked ahead, asking, "When did you fall for that person?" "I liked him since high school," I answered awkwardly, but it was only recently that I had a chance to be close to him. He suddenly stepped on the brake and turned to me with a complicated expression. "Don't love too humbly. Men won't cherish that." I smiled. "You're right." The honking horn behind us mixed with curses. The car accelerated, and his tone returned to normal. "Let's make an appointment. I'll treat him to dinner." I chuckled. "As an ex-husband, as a senior brother," he replied coldly. "I should have divorced you earlier. Sorry for delaying you all these years." Later that night, I called my best friend Lisa. "What nonsense. If he has a low sperm count, is this child a result of immaculate conception?" I changed the tassels on the curtain. "He went to the hospital for tests with Jane that day." "Are you saying Jane tampered with something?" Lisa suddenly realized. "It must be. You should quickly tell Jack about her past pregnancies." "In fact," I said, "I only heard from a senior sister that she consulted with a middle-aged man about giving birth while she was abroad. I just wanted to test her that day, not expecting she would play dirty tricks on me. I don't have solid evidence. And do you think the problem between Jack and me is because of Jane? It's not her. Even without her, Jack wouldn't love me." Jack was particularly persistent about meeting the child's father, urging me thrice in a row. I couldn't find a suitable candidate, delaying it time and time again. But Jane came to find me. "He won't believe the child is his. You better get rid of it soon. Do you want him to be fatherless like you, looked down upon by everyone from birth?" My eyes widened. This was a deeply hidden secret. A wound I didn't want to reveal. "How did she know?" Jane gloated. "Jack told me not to argue with you." My pain was just a bargaining chip for him to comfort his lover. I retorted, "And how do you plan to cover up your lies?" "You don't need to worry about that. As long as I say it, he'll believe me. Because he loves me." Jack suddenly became caring. In the morning, he would purposely take a detour to drop me off at work, and in the evening, he would come to pick me up after work. My colleagues envied me for finding such a good husband. In the early dark of late autumn, as the streetlights gradually lit up, he stood under a large camphor tree in a camel-colored coat, looking at me from a distance, as if he was still the boy who had saved me from the fire when we first met. This care was both sweet and deadly poison. "I can take the car by myself." I checked. "You need to be extra careful in the first 3 months. Before your boyfriend comes back from his business trip, I'll temporarily substitute for him." I touched my still flat belly, feeling a mix of emotions. He took me to my favorite porridge shop. The warm porridge made me feel warm all over, and in the mist, his distinct face softened. "Have you eaten enough?" he asked softly. "Mary, Jane can't conceive. Don't mention your pregnancy in front of her." The steam from the leftover porridge formed countless ice crystals that pierced my eyes. All his attentiveness in the past days was just a setup for this sentence. My stomach churned, and I vomited violently into a trash can. The warm porridge that had just warmed my body now felt like a death sentence. Jack stood up to pat my back, but I avoided him. After emptying my stomach, the urge to vomit still couldn't be stopped. I took a deep breath and looked at the man frowning across from me. "Jack, would you believe me if I said Jane was already pregnant with another man's child when she split from you?" Jack furrowed his brow. "Do you believe she swapped out your low sperm count medical report?" Jack's face turned cold. "Mary, Jane is not like that. I believe her." As expected, those who are loved will always be believed. I smirked at him. "Jack, you have a grey hair. Let me pluck it for you." He seemed puzzled but obediently bowed his head. I plucked out 2 hairs with follicles from the swirl on top of his head. "Look, I was mistaken. There's only 1 grey hair." I contacted my senior sister in Germany. Additionally, I arranged to have Jack's hair tested for a paternity test. After leaving the testing center, I unexpectedly ran into Jane. She led me to a nearby grove. Her eyes filled with caution and hostility. "Are you planning to tie him down with the child?" "No, I just want to preserve the truth." Suddenly, Jane grabbed my hand in a strange grip, asserting dominance. Her eyes showed madness. "Mary, I only have him left. I will hold on to him, and no one can take him away from me." Before I could react, she yanked me, and we tumbled down from a high platform together. The excruciating pain overwhelmed me, and a burning sensation trailed down my legs. The intense pain made me curl up tightly. Jane glanced back at me, and continued rolling down 2 more steps, then screamed, "Jack, help me." I saw Jack rushing over like a whirlwind, holding her anxiously. "Jane, Jane." Blood was gushing out, and I mustered all my strength to cry out, my voice as weak as a kitten, Jack." Jack turned around and glanced in my direction. Jane tugged at him. "Jack, it hurts." Jack immediately turned back to comfort her. "I'll take you to the hospital now. Just hold on." He carried Jane away quickly, leaving me lying in a pool of blood in the middle. I watched him carefully lift Jane into the car and speed away. He never looked back once. In a daze, I was lifted onto an ambulance, the doctor reassuring me, "Don't worry, we'll do our best to save the child." I was in despair, holding her hand tightly. "No, please take away this child." I slept until the next day. Lisa, with red eyes, sat by my bed, and there were no missed calls from Jack on her phone. Lisa struggled to speak. "The child, I know." I hadn't cried, but she burst into tears. In my email, there was a revised divorce agreement from the lawyer, and the appraisal center called me to say the results were ready for pickup. I also received some photos from my senior sister. The day I was discharged from the hospital, I went home to pack my things, leaving the signed divorce agreement, appraisal report, and photos on his desk. When I moved into this house, I only had a small suitcase with me. 3 years later, I was leaving with the same small suitcase. Initially, I came with a full suitcase of love. Now, I was leaving with a full suitcase of heartbreak. As I was about to open the door with my suitcase, I bumped into Jack. Our eyes met, and a glimmer of light appeared in his tired eyes. "Mary, are you okay? Why haven't you been answering my calls these days?" he asked, concerned. "I've signed the divorce papers," I replied indifferently. "I can go get the paperwork anytime." He looked puzzled for a moment. "Let me help you with that." Only then did he notice my suitcase and asked, "Where are you going?" I smiled, saying, "Since we're divorced, I should move out to avoid any misunderstandings with Jane." Jack immediately denied it. "She won't mind." "Why do you look so pale? Are you feeling unwell? Where are you moving to?" "I'll move somewhere you can't see," I chuckled. When he left with Jane in his arms, I had wanted to confront him and ask if he truly didn't care about my well-being. But now, I didn't want to know the answer. With my suitcase in hand, I looked back at him teasingly. "Can I go now?" Ex-husband. The title stung, making his pupils shrink. Submissive as a lamb bearing its sharp teeth, he struggled to adjust for a moment. But after a few seconds, he managed to steady his breath. "Where are you going?" "I'll take you there. I know the place, and I can send the rest of your belongings to you." "No need, I've already arranged for a car," I replied. I crossed the threshold and pressed the down button for the elevator. As the elevator doors were about to close, Jack caught up and held my hand. His eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep, pleaded, "And me?" He hesitated. "What about your senior brother? Don't you need me either?" How amusing. If I didn't know him well enough, I might have thought he was reluctant because of love. Raising an eyebrow, I countered, so, senior brother, how do I keep you then? How can I want you back when you are trying to hold on like this? Wouldn't Jane mind? His hand loosened, and I took the opportunity to free myself and press the door close button. As the elevator doors slowly shut, they shielded me from the furrowed brows. For the time being, I stayed at Lisa's place. While Lisa was checking her phone, she suddenly let out a loud scream. I asked, "What's wrong?" She nervously responded, "Nothing." I glanced at her phone, seeing a photo of the engagement ring from Jane with the caption, "The sought-after ring, the sought-after person." Lisa tried to console me. Maybe it's all staged by her. Handing back the phone, I said, "It's okay. I've come to terms with it." For years, Jane was a looming sword hanging over my head. As I grasped at stolen happiness, unease lingered. Now this sword had finally fallen. The reality shattered the beautiful dream, yet on this night, I dreamt of many fragmented memories. About half a year after our wedding, it was my birthday. Jack was working late and said he wouldn't be home that night. I bought a small cake for $30 and celebrated alone. On the day I was born, my father had a car accident. Relatives around me said I was a jinx who had taken away my father's life. So, I had never properly celebrated my birthday. As the candle flickered, I heard the door unlock. Jack was back. In the deep of night, his gaze was so tender, and I opened up about my wounds. After a long silence, he softly said, "Happy birthday, Mary. From now on, I'll be there to celebrate with you every year." The following year on my birthday, he remembered. He reserved a restaurant I liked, and after dinner, while passing by a jewelry counter on the first floor, he suddenly said, "Let's buy you a ring. I've always forgotten to get you a wedding band." It was probably part of the act to make it all feel real, but back then, I was genuinely happy. Taking a bold move, I suggested, "Let's get matching rings. Mom even asked about it last time." "Sure, you pick," he agreed. I bought a pair of plain rings. I'll always remember the price, $199. Last year on my birthday, he took the day off to take me somewhere special. I didn't expect him to take me back to my hometown. He ordered a giant cake, invited my mom and relatives to dine at the best restaurant. Those who once called me a jinx, stealing my father's life, now wished me a happy birthday with smiling faces. The dreary memories were erased, painted over with bright colors. I thought I was starting anew. Until this year on my birthday, outside the appraisal center, I was covered in blood, watching him walk away with Jane in his arms without looking back. When I woke up, it was a bright day outside. My pillow was soaked with tears. There were several missed calls on my phone. 2 of them were from the investigating officers, asking me to come to the police station. There, I found Jane too. The officers apologized, explaining that it was a blind spot for surveillance, so they didn't capture the moment she pushed me. He visited around these days and couldn't find any eyewitnesses. Summoned Jane. She refused to admit it. It was expected, but when he heard the result, he was furious. Jane looked innocent. "Uncle Officer, I really didn't push her. Actually, she pushed me first. She reaped what she sowed." But as soon as she finished speaking, a tall figure walked in. The sunlight cast a long shadow. The upper body of the shadow fell on Jane. She looked up, slightly startled. "Jack, what are you doing here?" Jack smiled at her, then looked at me and asked, "Mary, why are you and Jane here? What's the deal with the paternity test report?" Jane's face changed. Then she suddenly looked at me. I calmly responded, "She pushed me, so I came to report it." Jane quickly defended herself. "Jack, I didn't." Jack looked at me and then at her, frowning. "Is there a misunderstanding between you two?" See, he doesn't believe me. I'm tired and don't want to explain further. No matter how much I say, he won't believe me. I wrapped myself in a blanket, protected my head and hands, stood up, and walked outside. Jack caught up, persistently asked, "What's the deal with the test report? Is the child really mine?" I looked up, the harsh sunlight at 10 o'clock piercing my eyes. "It doesn't matter anymore. If you don't believe it, then just pretend it's not yours, so you can marry your true love without any burden." He muttered to himself, "But we..." Jane followed, her voice soft and tender. "Mary, how did you get the sample for the paternity test report since Jack himself didn't go? Are you implying that it's fake?" Jack tightly held my wrist. "Let's go, let's do it again. That night you got drunk." He held his head in his hands, trying hard to recall. Then, his expression changed little by little, his voice trembling. "That night, it wasn't a dream. We really..." I looked at him and sneered wickedly. "And we don't have a chance to do it again." "What do you mean?" "Because the child was aborted." This scene is really ridiculous. I couldn't help but laugh louder and louder, looking at him through half-closed eyes, word by word. "A few days ago, Jane pushed me down from the testing center. You saved her, but my child didn't survive. it was lost. Oh, forgot. You said it was a misunderstanding. Jane tearfully said. Jack, it wasn't me, it was her. She pushed me and accidentally. I suppressed my laughter, looked at her indifferently. Well, then why were you at the testing center? Earlier, he only mentioned the test report. So how did you become so certain that it's a paternity test? Jane, with tears in her eyes, said. I just guessed, Jack. I really didn't. Under the sunlight, Jack's face was as white as a ghost. His lips trembled incessantly. Was it really you calling me that day? It wasn't me. Could it be a ghost? The wind picked up. I'm still in recovery and can't expose myself to the wind. Fortunately, the ride I booked arrived. I bent down and got in the car. I saw Jack standing still in the rearview mirror, like a puppet who had lost his soul. How pitiful. If only he could be more pathetic. Lisa called me on the way, asking if I saw Jack. You tell him I'm at the police station. Yeah, let him see firsthand Jane's true colors. The investigating officer said it was a blind spot for surveillance cameras, and no eyewitnesses were found. Lisa over there was cursing non-stop. This result wasn't unexpected either. She was so bold, must have been well prepared beforehand. Maybe even the statement about Jack not acknowledging the child was just a trap to see my reaction. If I got rid of it myself, it would be the best. If I went for the test, she would have been prepared to handle it. When I got home, my phone kept ringing. Jack must have finally come to his senses. I just blocked all his contact numbers. I took all my accumulated annual leave for these 2 years in one go. Still couldn't avoid dreaming. I dreamt of a cold winter day, scrolling through my phone, seeing my classmates in Hawaii playing by the seaside. I envied them so much and casually sighed. They're having a great time right now. I wish I could go too. Jack was working on files at the dining table. He paused, rubbed his brow. I still have a lot of unused leave. Let's go stay there for a month next year. At that time, he always liked to bring his notebook and work in the dining room. He said the study faced north, dark and gloomy. I changed to a brighter light bulb for him, but still no satisfaction. I jumped up from the sofa. Really? Then I won't take any annual leave this year. Really? When have I ever lied to you? Winter came again. I watched the withered leaves outside the window. Hawaii was hit by an epidemic. Even if I had annual leave, I couldn't go. Perhaps it was fate. After staying at home for a few days, one afternoon, there was a knock on the door. I thought it was a food delivery, but it was Jack. He was still wearing that camel coat. In the past, when he wore it, it always made my heart flutter. Now, it could be because he didn't shave completely, the oil stain on his white sweater, or the dirt on his shoe tips. Although my heart still fluttered, it was no longer chaotic. Why are you here? He waved the food box in his hand at me. I checked the information, and it said you need some supplements now. So I made the soup for you. I was skeptical. Is it edible? I remember once when I had a high fever. He tried to make porridge for me in a clay pot, and ended up burning through the bottom of the pot. The noodles he cooked clumped together. He opened it with a pleasing look, and I peeked inside. The soup wasn't perfectly clear, but it wasn't a disaster. This is made with an authentic old hen I caught early this morning from the countryside, with ginseng and wolfberry inside, he explained incessantly, but I interrupted him. I appreciate the thought. Keep the chicken soup for yourself. Lisa had already prepared everything before going to work. Most of the time, best friends are more reliable than men. Slowly, he screwed the lid back onto the thermos. If you're here to get a divorce certificate from me, I'll go change my clothes now. No, he interrupted me in a low voice. I came to explain to you that day at the appraisal center. I didn't see you. Afraid that I wouldn't believe him, he took out his phone and played a video clip. He asked a passerby to lie down where I was at that time, while he was still in the position where he picked up Jane. I was in his blind spot at that time. There was a pillar that exactly blocked me. At that moment, it seemed like I heard your voice. I turned around, but didn't see you. Plus, Jane kept urging me. No wonder. That day when he turned back, his eyes seemed unfocused. Struggling, he said, I know it's too late to say all this now, but that day I didn't deliberately abandon you to save her. Mary, I'm sorry. The sensor light turned on, enveloping him in a dim, yellow light. Jack, I don't blame you, I said. He looked bewildered. You love her. Even if you saw me at the same time, you would have saved her first, right? By the way, I have to thank you. In that moment, I completely gave up. I knew I would never be your first choice. The dream is over, but it's not too late. The hallway windows were closed, but a cold wind seemed to come from nowhere, making me shiver and wrap my neck. "We should go inside and talk," Jack insisted. I raised my hand to stop him at the door. "Everything that needs to be said has been said. I really don't blame you. Go back." Loving him was my willingness. Not being loved by him was within my expectations. I overestimated my charm. Before leaving, Jack insisted on leaving the soup. I didn't drink the soup. When Lisa came back at night, she curiously opened the bag, and I saw a velvet box at the bottom of the thermos cup. Inside was a limited edition necklace and a handwritten birthday card. That day when we went out for dinner, I tried on the necklace at the counter. He said it looked nice and wanted to buy it for me, but I refused. It was too expensive. The receipt showed that the necklace was purchased before the incident. Lisa cautiously looked at me. "It looks like he always remembers your birthday. It's not important." A belated birthday gift, like a cake with melted cream overnight, no longer tastes as anticipated. "The incident with Jane pushing you can't just end like this," I told Lisa. I posted many missing person notices near the appraisal center, hoping to find witnesses or someone who could provide strong evidence. That night, Jane called me. "Did Jack come to see you today? What did you tell him? He seems lost. Did you use the abortion to morally blackmail him?" I responded coldly, "Actually, I wasn't planning to keep this child." "You're going too far. If I really did morally blackmail him, then you gave me this chip." Jane angrily hung up the phone. "Lisa's boyfriend is a doctor. This day on his day off, he came to visit me at home and mentioned meeting Jack 2 days ago at the urology department for a sperm vitality test. The hospital where he works is in another district. It seems like Jack deliberately changed hospitals." Lisa was furious. "What's the matter? He still doesn't believe the child is his. What's the point of doing this ridiculous test? It's better to really come out as infertile and regret it for a lifetime." Shaking my head, I said, "He probably doesn't want to believe that the white moonlight he has cherished for many years has a cruel side." Lisa sneered. "He seems like a smart man, but is blind." Suddenly, I remembered a distant memory. Back then, my classmate mentioned seeing Jane, and I mentioned it to Jack, but he changed his tone immediately, with a particularly cold and distant tone. "Mary, I trust her, and she will never deceive me. Don't talk about this behind my back." At that time, aside from being sad, I was actually envious. I envied Jane could have unconditional trust. Only a person who is deeply loved can receive this partiality. And since he didn't love me, no matter how much I told him the truth, he wouldn't believe it. 10 days later, after my postpartum recovery, I returned to work. I had a lot of backlog, and by the time I finished it, it was already 8 o'clock. I walked out of the office holding the unfinished coffee, and saw Jane waiting downstairs. In the early winter chill, she was dressed lightly and didn't look too well. Seeing me come out, she sneered and gestured with her lips. "Just had a miscarriage. Rested for half a month. You're really pampered. You must have told him about me in Germany. Even if you've been married to him for 3 years without him falling in love with you, even if I'm gone, you still won't be his." Each word was sharp, stabbing at my wounds. I couldn't bear it anymore. I picked up the coffee in my hand and splashed it on her face. Brown coffee ran down her face, dripping onto her white sweater, leaving a dirty mark on her chest. She lowered her head in silence for a while. Her chest heaved violently, as if she wanted to scream. I was on guard, but she slowly raised her head, eyes red, and said with a deep sense of grievance, "Jack." She splashed me. Out of the shadow behind her, Jack slowly emerged. He was still wearing that coat, but he had lost a lot of weight, and the originally well-fitted clothes were now loose. The night wind filled the clothes like a sail adrift in the ocean. He looked at the coffee cup in my hand, then at the distinctive stains on her white sweater, and then looked at Jane with disgust and impatience. "What are you up to now?" Jane paused. "It really was her who splashed me. You can check the surveillance." Jack gave me a deep look. "I know Mary's character. If she really splashed it, it must be because you did something excessive." Jane was greatly discouraged, swayed, and fell directly to the ground. Looking up, tears fell from her eyes. "You don't believe me at all now." "I believe Mary." It turned out that I, too, had a moment when I was unconditionally favored, but it wasn't as happy as I imagined. Jane went crazy. "I know you hate me. I've told you many times I want to go abroad, to get far away from here, but you didn't agree. So, I had to find someone else. When I told you I wanted to leave, you were willing to go abroad with me, but by then, I already had someone else's child. You think you're pathetic." She had a miscarriage and is being taken care of at home, with friends to comfort her and your attention. "What about me?" she roared. "That man lied to me. He has a wife. As soon as his wife came looking for him, he left immediately. I can't communicate, and I have no money. Medical care abroad is very expensive, very expensive." She held her stomach, I can't have children now. Jack, all of this is because of you. You have to take responsibility for me. Jack looked complicated. He slowly squatted down and looked Jane in the eyes. Calmly he said, you should have told me what kind of person your stepfather and stepbrother were from the beginning. Jane, tears rolling, suddenly smiled. I don't want to say, because I want to be the flawless moon in your heart forever. I almost succeeded. There was meaning in her eyes. Jack, I have a secret that neither of you will ever find out what. She crazily laughed, glanced at me and then at Jack. I won't tell you. Before leaving, Jane whispered in my ear, saying softly, Mary, do you think I was trying to obstruct you? No, it's because he didn't love you enough. Jack insisted on taking me back. The car stopped outside Lisa's house. He took out a notebook from his bag. I found this while packing my things these past few days, under the bed. It had my name written on the old pink cover. It was my diary. The lock had rusted and fell off with a touch. So, I opened it and read it. I flipped through the worn-out cover. November 10th, 2009. He was like a ray of light that cut through the dark clouds over my head and saved me. November 11th, 2009. He turned out to be the academic genius of his high school class, Jack. I stared at him during the break exercise, and he didn't notice me. November 20th, 2009. Today, we had lunch together at the cafeteria. He doesn't eat celery. I looked at him over 100 times, and he didn't notice me. August 10th, 2010. He got accepted by a university. He is so outstanding. I saw his name on the school's honor roll. He still doesn't know me, right? September 1st, 2012. He glanced at me today. I told him I also graduated from same school and studied the same major as him. He smiled and called me junior sister. Very happy. October 9th, 2012. It rained today. We walked together from the library to the canteen with an umbrella. He said, thank you, junior sister. He doesn't remember my name. November 10th, 2012. I had lunch with him at the canteen today. He said, what a coincidence, junior sister. I said, what a coincidence, senior brother. He was stunned. He still doesn't remember my name, even though I emphasized it last time. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2012, he played guitar on stage. I was in the crowd among numerous fans, shouting loudly, Jack, I like you. He shone on stage and said to everyone, thank you for your love. I was also one of you. That was the last page of the diary. After that, I started writing my diary entries on my social media account. One-sided love is both bitter and frantic. Jack cleared his throat and softly said, I'm sorry. Over all these years, I missed you. I closed the notebook and smiled lightly. It has nothing to do with you. You were the first rays of light in my dark life. I chased you, got close to you, just to move away from the darkness. It was to gain strength and grow up. You don't have to take responsibility for this love. I've been chasing you for so many years, probably just out of instinct, because I always looked up at you. I couldn't see any other light, because I always followed your footsteps. I instinctively kept loving you. Jack tightly held my hand. I figured it out recently. My heart had already been infiltrated by you a long time ago. I have unknowingly fallen for you too. Can we start again? This time, will you be my light? He had a burning and cautious look in his eyes. I had waited for those words for 13 years. I let him hold my hand, and gently said, Jack, I once thought that my love for you would never stop in this lifetime. When we got married, I thought I could always have you as this warm light. But later, I slowly realized that you are ice that I can't melt. I live in fear every day, worried that this beautiful dream will shatter. Jack tightened his grip. Mary, it's not going to happen. This is not a dream. We will truly love each other and spend our lives together. No, Jane's return shattered this dream. I slowly pulled my hand out, took a deep breath. It's good. The dream has finally ended. This chase went on for too long, exhausting all my passion and expectations for this love. It's like a tree, still looking normal on the surface, but with roots that have rotted beyond repair, incapable of regaining vitality. Jack hit his forehead on the steering wheel, and after a long time, he hoarsely said, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you loved me. I didn't realize I had already fallen for you. No, he should have understood my feelings long ago. He was exceptional since childhood, liked by many. He could easily reject those who liked him and avoid them deliberately. I don't believe he didn't notice my feelings. It was just that I didn't speak up, and he could pretend not to know with peace of mind. Mary, give me another chance. Please, give me another chance. In his eyes filled with bloodshot veins, I saw my own calmness. I gently smiled. Jack, let's exit this gracefully. We agreed at the beginning that if one of us wanted to leave, the other couldn't entangle them. Originally, it was his way of restricting me. I didn't expect that 3 years later, it would become my weapon against him. He lost all color from his face. His throat rolled repeatedly, but no sound came out. As I got off the car, I remembered an old memory. Do you remember the small blackboard behind the literature building back then? The literature department moved to a new building, leaving the old one temporarily empty. There was a secluded study corner behind it. I accidentally discovered that Jack liked to write down the questions he couldn't solve on the blackboard. Heaven knows how much effort I put in back then when I was a freshman, self-studying everywhere, secretly asking around, rushing to solve those questions silently before lights out. Then I wrote down the questions I found on the side. It went on like this back and forth for 2 months. Then one day, when I went there, I saw on the blackboard, "Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, let's meet." I was so excited that I couldn't sleep all night. The next day, I put on my prettiest dress, had my roommate do my makeup, and headed to the destined meeting. I rehearsed the confession in my mind 1,000 times. But after the class, what I saw was him holding Jane's hand. Looking back now, that sourness and despair from the beginning still lingered. I held back the tears in my eyes and said, "You never told me the answer to that last question." Jack's expression changed drastically, as if struck by lightning. He rushed over and grabbed me tightly, trembling as he asked, "You were the one who communicated with me about the questions all along, weren't you?" "Then who?" His eyes seemed to be tainted with a blood-red hue. "Jane said it was her. So, that's why they got together. So, that's the secret she would never tell us. It was you. It was actually you." Jack's tall figure in the dark night seemed like a withered branch that could break with a slight bend. Numerous emotions surged up, and with a soft sigh, I finally said calmly, "This must be fate." If only I had explained a few more things back then. If only he had asked Jane a little more. The gears of fate should have rolled in a completely different direction. God gave us many chances, but we missed them all due to cowardice, overthinking, and unwillingness in our hearts. It was destined that we wouldn't end up together on that night. I dreamed again. I dreamt of Jack standing under the street lamp, and as I jumped off the bus and ran to him, I said, "I'm Mary from the first-year class. Thank you for helping me earlier. Remember, my name is Mary." He gave a faint smile and repeated, "Mary, I remember." Epilogue. One day at the end of November, I received a call from an unfamiliar number during a meeting. I thought it was a prank call, but at noon, that call came through again. It was a man in his 30s, who said that he was at the appraisal center that day to pick up a report, and his car was parked across the street. The dashcam happened to capture Jane pushing me down the stairs. He happened to see the missing person notice today, checked the dashcam footage, and discovered this scene. Although Jane deliberately disguised the situation when she pushed me, making it seem like I pushed her. After extensive police investigation, it was determined that she was the one who provoked and intentionally pushed me down, resulting in my miscarriage. This constituted intentional harm. She was eventually sentenced to 2.5 years. I went to court on the day of the trial. When the bailiff took her away, I said to her, regarding the little blackboard, "Jack already knows about it. Jane, you have no right to accuse me of taking advantage of the situation. You stole my chance first." She was completely defeated. Jack disappeared for a long time. Turns out, he went to Hawaii alone regardless of the epidemic. When he came back, his complexion darkened, and he silently accompanied me to get a divorce certificate. At first, the agreement clearly favored me in terms of property, but the agreement I later signed was voluntary departure, without any property. We argued for a long time, and he insisted that if we didn't divide the marital property, he wouldn't sign. In the end, I received a compensation of $1,500,000. With that money, I bought a new house in the west of the city. Jack's house was in the east, one west, and less deliberately, in such a big city, it would be difficult to meet again. It was just a coincidence. The person who provided me with evidence happened to live in the same community as me. We worked in the same office park. Sometimes we would go to and from work together. He had it worse than me. He married his ex-wife out of obligation, raised her child for 3 years, only to realize he was a stopgap. The child turned out to be his ex-wife's first love. Perhaps it was sympathy for the pitiful that brought us together. We ended up together after leading uneventful lives. 2 years later, I gave birth to a pair of twins. On the 100th day, I invited friends for a meal, and my mentor also came. She held the 2 children and tears welled up in her eyes. If only. Jack never got married. His career flourished, and occasionally, I would see his interviews. One day, my phone received a notification. The host asked him what type of girl he likes. After a few seconds of silence, he looked deeply into the camera and said, "Someone who can solve problems." The child was crying, so I turned off the tablet, picked them up, and gently comforted them. The study door opened, and my husband hurriedly came out. Why are they crying again? Are they hungry or need a diaper change? Unrequited love is too bitter. I think this kind of life is the sanctuary I yearn for the most.